Continuing with the second session of Theme 3, I've explained that the absolute standard of rightness in the physical sciences is that which is both true and valid. And it is therefore time to discuss the concept of validity. I will begin with a quotation from the French mathematician Henri Poincaré, who said, "A science is built on facts in the same way that a house is built up of bricks. But a mere accumulation of facts does not constitute a science any more than a pile of bricks constitute a house." All right, what all that means? Of what value is a pile of bricks? A pile of bricks is, in your way, it's a clutter. A pile of bricks only have value if and when they are organized in some rational way, rational form. The form could be a brick wall, a chimney, a side of a building. This is the only time the bricks have any value. Prior to that, at best, it's a potential value. The same thing applies to facts. You can have a pile of facts, but they're not science. It's organized knowledge that makes a science. Science is actually defined as the totality of organized knowledge. It doesn't deal with any particular branch of knowledge. It deals with any domain of knowledge that can be called organized. But where does the order came from? This brings us then to the second component of rightness in the physical sciences. It is called validity. Validity refers essentially to a mental process whereby one arrives at a conclusion. Validity essentially constitutes the totality of the rules of logic. Now, logic itself is a large subject. We could spend many lectures just on the subjects of logic. We don't have the time to do that. There are books written on the subject, although I don't have one to recommend you. From my own experience, most of it a lot of esoteric gibberish. I will come to the grand test for validity, let's say a couple of seminars from now. More significant than anything I will have to say today on the subject, I'm not going to give you a diagramming of syllogisms, but I will give you a few syllogisms. I'm going to give you a very cursory view of the subject. The grand test for validity I'll discuss, as I said, in 2 or 3 seminars from now. Let's look at the syllogism. And we would like to find out if the conclusion is valid. We might have a syllogism that has a first premise, a second premise, and a conclusion. The first premise might say, whoa. The second premise say, whoa, whoa, whoa. The third, whoa, 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 whoa. We would like to know if the whoa, 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 whoa valid. Therefore implies that when you even use the term, then you are now reaching some conclusion based on prior premises. Let's test the first syllogism for validity. The first premise says, all students at Princeton are men. The second premise, John is a student at Princeton. Therefore, John is a man. Is this a valid syllogism? Is the inference valid? Does it flow from the premises? Yes, it's a valid syllogism. Let's look at the second syllogism. Test it again for validity. Validity, thought process. All people who graduated from college are always right. All wives are always right. Smith graduated from college, therefore Smith is always right. Is this a valid syllogism? College students always right, Smith graduated from college, therefore he is right. Yeah. Does it follow? Yes, this is a valid syllogism. One thing to learn when you're testing for validity is always assume that the premises are true. We're not checking they're true or not. We're assuming and then want to see the flow of the logic. Whether the premises are true or not is irrelevant if we're testing only for validity. You assume them to be true. They may not be, but it's relevant when you're testing for validity. All right, let's now give you a ground rule that has some value. And that is when all the premises are true, and in addition, the thought process is valid, then the conclusion will be right. Again, if all the premises are true, and in addition, the thought process is valid, then the conclusion will be right. Let's now test the first syllogism for rightness. We already determined that it is valid. Now, what must we do? Go back and test the premises for what? For truth. The first premise is all students at Princeton are men. Now, is that true? Well, I understand they changed the rules but at Princeton, but let's assume that we're a century ago where ground rules were the same. All students in Princeton are men. So I assume that the first premise is true. All right, second premise. John is a student at Princeton. What shall we do? We check the records. John is enrolled. All right. The first premise is true. The second premise is true. The conclusion is valid. Therefore, in addition, the conclusion must be what? Right. And it is. It satisfies the ground rule. All right, let's test the second syllogism. We have already determined it's valid. Now we must test the premises to see if they are true. All people who graduated from college are always right. Is that true? I also said all wives are right. It's as true as all wives are right. I will define false as the negative of true or not true, true or not true. So we do not need term false. We need only, in the science, we need only true or not true, yes or no. All I have to say it's not true. But when I say false, I mean not true. The second premise, Smith graduated from college. That's true, we checked the records. Smith did graduate, so the conclusion is valid. The conclusion is valid, the second premise is true, and the conclusion is not right. It flunks the ground rule because the first premise is false. We'll go to one more syllogism, testing it for validity. All Germans were and are philosophers. Socrates was German. Therefore, Socrates was a philosopher. Is this valid? This is another example of a valid syllogism. Socrates was philosopher. Now we're testing for validity. It's all. Because you see something wrong with what you see doesn't necessarily mean it's invalid. The thought process is valid. All right, let's look at the conclusions. Socrates was a philosopher. True. The conclusion is valid and the conclusion is true. It's used by propagandists and zombie masters, this particular thing. I will talk about it next time, but it's so important. You cannot imagine how important it is in zombifying you or us or them, whatever. So please try to understand. I know it's not, we always use all these words interchangeably. Let's continue. Does it pass the ground rule or flank it? Well, it's true and it's valid, and it's not right, because it flanks the ground rule. Why? What must we do now? Test the premises for truth. First premise, all Germans were and are philosophers. Is that true? No, it's not true, meaning false. Some Germans were and are philosophers, but not all. Some Germans are truck drivers, other butchers, some bakers, stormtroopers. Socrates was a German. Is that true? False. All right. Now there is an interesting syllogism. The conclusion is true. Yeah, Socrates was philosopher. And the conclusion is valid, because if if then logic is good and the conclusion is not right because the first two premises are false. Now, you don't normally hear somebody say, for example, well, I think your conclusion is true and I don't think it's valid, it's not right. People use all these terms, words interchangeably, mostly truth, validity, rightness, they use without even thinking about what they're saying. They don't know what they mean. When they say they don't mean what you think they mean in any scientific sense. It's practically impossible to reach any agreement in anything in the world when two people discuss something without first talking about the terminology. I'll cover that later. It's very important because most people do not know what prove means. We cannot prove to each other anything. You cannot prove to anyone, to most of the people all the time, because they would know a proof if you hit them over the head with it. But it's necessary or no? No, it's not necessary in science to prove anything to most people. It's irrelevant in the scientific sense. We'll come to that a little bit later. Now, let's stop and talk next week we meet. Until that time, please, 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 maybe you can one more time listen to this lecture. It's a basis for something very important called propaganda, called as a zombification, called even marketing. Because people who market something to us, who want to convince us in something, they know that very well. Until next time.